8 odd billion to be about 11 billion by the end of the fiscal, that is by March. So that's fairly big. And being big, there is a perception amongst the customers that when it comes to anything that is transformational, whether it is technology or it is the business processes, Indian companies need to step up. So that can happen only if we start getting a little more aggressive, a little more with the universities, and a little more. The moment you start talking about yourself more aggressively in forums, I think you change. Your mind changes, your approach changes. You would like to be a little more aggressive and go grab those projects that are on the cutting edge. If you're forever on the trailing edge, you kind of don't have that bounce and the ambition. And that is one transformation that I think is in the making, but I think we are still about 3, 4, 5 years away. I see Indian companies having that ambition, but they're still not spending enough dollars to make those ambitions come true. So, what's happening in the marketplace? Around 2003, 2004, there was a marked change that happened in the outsourcing industry, and it really caught the Indian companies napping. What happened was the Accentures and the IBMs, they went to India, post the dot-com bust, they went to India, they knew this Y2K model kind of proved the India story, and even with the dot-com bust, there was a strong, credible India story that was there. So they realized that they need to really step up their India operations. So IBM went in a big way starting 2003 into India, and so did Accenture. And today they have size and scale that matches any of the large companies. And it is expected that IBM would be larger than even TCS for that matter out of India. Today they do more business, they have the hardware business, so they do more business. That's a separate story. They're the largest government contractor, they're the largest defense contractor. And the expectation is that their capacities out of India will be larger than most of the Indian providers. So what has that resulted in? That our story around the market cost arbitrage, that has been completely blunted. The Indian companies are no longer the story that we've got this capacity because Capgemini has got capacity, Accenture has got capacity, IBM has got capacity, and all of these guys have more capacity than many of the, what should I say, anything less than the fourth or the fifth player. Most of them are much, much larger than them. So the tier 2 vendors in the Indian market are really, really struggling today. Their growth is being challenged. And the other problem that the tier 2 vendors are facing, tier 2 are the sub-billion-dollar companies. The other challenge that they face is a huge amount of attrition. Attrition is a common problem across the marketplace, but there's a pecking order of recruitment that happens in India. On top come the product companies, so you have the Googles and the Microsofts and the Motorola's who are doing the core R&D work, the Intels. They are doing the core R&D, so that's where bulk of the talent from the IIT seem to find its way. Then are the multinationals. Their branding, even in the Indian market today, there was a time when Wipro, Infosys, TCS was a fairly strong brand and there was a huge amount of brand pull. But that brand pull has been challenged by the Accentures and the IBMs, particularly these two companies. And what they have done is they've hired a significant amount of middle management talent from these large organizations. So that was a quick ramp up as to what this India outsourcing model is all about. So they could come to speed on that very, very quickly by hiring a lot of the Indian talent that existed in the large Indian corporations. And so then come the tier 1 Indian players. And then are the tier 2 Indian players. And when it comes to the corporate sector in India, they are struggling to hire people. Because there are so many of these IT companies willing to hire the IT talent that they are virtually unable to hire talent. So that has become a source of business for the tier 1 Indian players. So suddenly there seems to be a huge demand from the Airtels of the world, from in fact Aircel, Airtel. These are all large outsourcing contracts that companies, they are $1 billion 5-year contracts. So these are contracts happening out of India. And these are places where I think the Indian companies have done a great job. They've been able to tap into these contracts. They've been able to take the IBMs and the others head on and done a fairly credible job. So the tier 2s in India, that story is under a lot of pressure. That story will be under a lot of challenge in the years to come. So you will see a lot of M&A activities happening in India, especially with the small guys. They will ultimately get absorbed with the larger guys. And if you go by the rule of 3, that ultimately it will be the top three who will survive, there is an expectation that the tier 1 Indian vendors and the American vendors, there would be some amount of acquisitions that will happen, mergers and acquisitions that will happen. And in whose favor is that dice loaded? Clearly in favor of the Indian companies. Indian companies today are cash rich. Indian companies make something like 26-27% margins. Although Wipro is a little lower, but TCS has been the leader there. All of these companies are sitting on piles of cash, and plus their market cap is in most cases comparable to the market cap of these companies or higher. So should this acquisition and merger activity not happen? I think it will happen, but I think there are significant cultural issues that kind of hold back. No matter how well we understand the American or the US, the world of the Western world, but when it comes to working, I think there are significant differences. And these differences we see when we start working locally, we significantly hire locally. And at the end of the day, we are a collectivist society. And in a collectivist society, a lot of things happen out of being part of a group. So if you're part of the same project group, your project manager is expected to be the father figure. And the father figure and the brother figure and the elder brother within a collectivist group takes care of each other. So what happens is that a rookie can be thrown into a project and there'll be enough help and support available to make this guy productive. So although we all have great training systems, but our training systems are not as detailed as they need to be, and they get into the last nuts and bolts and makes a guy productive. A lot of things are left to the fact that once this guy is on the project, there will be support systems that will work. The other thing that seems to be the case is we have a lot of tolerance for ambiguity. That is to say, we have a huge capacity for jugaad. For us, not everything needs to be very well defined to the last T and the dotting the last I's and crossing the last T's. It is not a must. Somewhere the Indian mind can figure out what needs to be done as we go along. Whereas there's a huge requirement from the Western counterparts that, guys, we've got to have a detailed plan. And that plan should be fairly detailed to the last step. And nothing would be left to chance. Now that really causes a lot of anxieties. So consequently, I think both parties have been shying away from any major acquisition. But it's only a matter of time. As I see, there is a kind of a convergence of cultures. Progressively, I see that the Americans, their tolerance for ambiguity seems to go up, at least when they come and work with Indians. It was a lot less 5 years back, but today it seems to be a lot higher. And on the other hand, the Indians are also making changes. They're also transforming and they're also making their changes, so their ambiguity tolerance is going up, the Americans. And the Indians, I think, are doing a much better job of what they need to do by way of planning and sticking to a plan and executing on a plan and making things explicit if the plans were to change. 10 years back, the project plan would be made only on day one, and after 10 weeks, there would be a huge difference between what is actually being done and what was there in the project plan. But today that has changed. So there is a huge change, and most Indian companies today have, at least all the tier 1 companies have about 10,000 Western employees, at least 10,000 Western employees. And not everything is hunky-dory there, but I think it is getting there. And when the likes of Wipro and the TCSs start hiring from campuses and Infosys, I think it would get even better. So there would be a convergence of cultures, and it will not only impact the few providers, but I think it will impact the culture as a whole. Any observations here, guys? These are some of the things that I see all the time, and these are my impressions, but if you guys have any experiences to share or any questions on this matter.
What do you think about
One is the dollar has been fairly stable over the last 1 year. It's been moving in a very narrow band. So it hasn't been a very wild fluctuation, although in 2008 or 2007. 2007 was the time when the rupee had really gone very, very strong. So much so that there was a prediction that the rupee to dollar conversion would be 30 rupees. But ever since, it has stabilized in that $44 to $46 range, and it hasn't moved. But currency fluctuations, more than currency fluctuations, I think the challenge is the wage rise that is happening in India. That, I think, is a bigger problem. Because your supply is limited, although the supply has been growing considerably. Again, my own observations, the number of engineers we churn out every year is 300,000, but then most of these engineering colleges, I'm sorry to say, do not have the infrastructure that is required to really make learning and education really happen. But full credit to the Indian mind and the Indian will. The will to succeed is so high that these guys do whatever it takes to make themselves IT savvy, IT literate, and these guys really slog it out. And overall, there's a deterioration as far as academic institutions are concerned. And I can say that because I've seen things from close quarters. My nephew went to VJTI, and VJTI also relied a lot on the same professors who are supposed to do courses, doing personal training and coaching for the exams, which is a very sad story because VJTI at one point was only second to IIT Bombay in Bombay. But today, I think the difference between the IITs and the IIMs in the next year of school, the regional engineering colleges, except for some few engineering colleges which have kind of held their own, the RECs, a lot of the regional colleges have actually gone down as far as their education delivery is concerned. And there's a huge mushrooming of tier 3 institutions. But the tier 3 institutions, the reason why I think our guys are doing very well is just their will to succeed.
What's your opinion about the mid-market, $300 million, $3 million companies, and what do you think? We all know that big companies like Wipro, IBM, Accenture, everybody struggle in that space. Do you think that will continue to be the case, or do you think eventually one of the big firms will figure out a way?
I think to figure out a way to play that market, everybody's stated intent has been that we want to play in the mid-sector.
Right, for 5 years.
Including SAP.
Right.
They've been trying to penetrate that market, and the guys who are really successful are the QuickBooks of the world.
Right.
And what is it going forward? I think going forward, what will really change is the technology landscape. Cloud computing and everything, all services being available on the cloud, and people not requiring to do a lot of customization to any of these package applications, and to do things like Salesforce does, may ease the pain. And 5 to 10 years down the road, it is expected that the mid-market would also have graduates coming out of their